The space station Concordia looked small against the black emptiness of space, but He-Jin knew it was one of the largest structures ever built by humans and aliens working together. She stood at the observation deck watching the stars while her heart beat faster than she wanted to admit. Today would change everything for humanity, and she knew it. 3 years of war had brought both sides to this moment. The Vorthak Empire controlled half the known galaxy, and humans controlled much less. But humans had something the aliens did not expect. They had the ability to fight back harder than anyone thought possible. Now the most powerful alien confederation had agreed to talk about peace. He-Jin had spent 20 years learning how to speak with aliens who did not think like humans. She had studied their languages and their ways of thinking and their cultures until she could predict what they would say before they said it. Her team trusted her completely, and humanity needed that trust now more than ever. The door behind her opened, and Colonel Dong-Woo walked in wearing his dress uniform with all his medals from the war. He was a big man with scars on his face from the Battle of New Seoul, where he had held off 3 Vorthak battalions with just 200 human soldiers. The aliens had learned to fear him and his tactical mind that could turn any situation into a human victory. "They will be here soon," Dong-Woo said in his quiet voice that always made people listen carefully. "Our scouts report their flagship just dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the system. It is bigger than anything we have ever seen before." He-Jin nodded but did not turn around. She had read all the reports about Vorthak ships and their technology, but seeing one in person would be different. "How long before they dock?" 6 hours if they follow standard approach patterns. But I do not think they will follow anything standard. They want us to know they could destroy this station anytime they choose." Dr. So-Young entered the room, carrying her datapad and looking tired from working all night. She was the best xenobiologist humanity had, and she knew more about alien life forms than anyone alive. Her research had helped human forces win battles by understanding how alien minds work differently from human minds. "I have been studying the crew manifest they sent us," So-Young said while reading from her pad. "Their delegation includes War Prime Kelthara, who has personally overseen the destruction of 6 different species. She is known for never accepting surrender and never showing mercy to any enemy." He-Jin finally turned around, and her 2 advisors could see the determination in her eyes. "Then we know what kind of beings we are dealing with. They did not come here to make real peace. They came here to watch us surrender." Tae-ho knocked on the doorframe before entering. He was young and quick and had been He-Jin's aide for 5 years. He could read her moods better than anyone, and he could make things happen that seemed impossible. "Ambassador, the station commander wants to know if you have any special security requirements for the meeting." "Tell him we will follow standard diplomatic protocols," He-Jin replied. "We have nothing to hide and nothing to fear." But that was not completely true. He-Jin did have fears about what would happen in the next few days. She feared that humanity might not survive if these talks failed. She feared that the Vorthak had some plan that her team had not discovered yet. Most of all, she feared that she might not be strong enough to do what needed to be done. The 4 humans spent the next hour reviewing their strategy one more time. They had prepared for every possible scenario and had backup plans for their backup plans. Dong-Woo had positioned human ships throughout the system in case the talks were a trap. So-Young had prepared detailed studies of Vorthak psychology to help predict their behavior. Tae-ho had made sure they could communicate with human command at any moment. The station intercom crackled to life and announced that the Vorthak flagship was requesting permission to dock. He-Jin felt her stomach tighten, but her voice stayed calm when she told Tae-ho to inform the station commander that permission was granted. 2 hours later, they stood in the main docking bay, watching as the Vorthak shuttle approached. It was black and angular and looked more like a weapon than a transport vehicle. The sound it made while landing was unlike anything human engines produced. It sounded like metal screaming. The shuttle door opened with a hiss of alien atmosphere, and the first Vorthak stepped out. They were tall and thin with too many joints in their arms and legs. Their skin looked like dark metal, and their faces had large black eyes that seemed to look right through everything they saw. They moved in, perfect synchronization, like parts of a single machine. War Prime Kelthara was the last to exit the shuttle, and she was larger than the others. She wore what looked like armor, but So Young had explained it was actually part of her exoskeleton. The translator device attached to her throat made clicking sounds before it spoke in perfect human language. "I am War Prime Kelthera of the Vorthak Empire," the device said, while her real voice made sounds like breaking glass. "I have come to accept your surrender and discuss the terms of your species' submission to Vorthak authority." Hyejin stepped forward and bowed slightly in the diplomatic manner she had practiced many times. "I am Ambassador Hyejin representing humanity and the United Colonial Defense Force. We welcome you to Concordia Station and look forward to productive discussions about ending this conflict." Kelthara's large eyes studied Hyejin for a long moment before the translator spoke again. "You speak of ending conflict as if your species has some choice in the matter. The conflict ends when your species accepts reality. The Vorthak Empire has conquered every star system we have chosen to take. Your resistance has been noted, but ultimately meaningless." Dongwu stepped closer to Hyejin, and his hand moved unconsciously toward where his weapon would normally be. The Vorthak guards noticed this movement, and their own hands moved toward their equipment. For a moment, the docking bay felt like a battlefield, where violence could explode at any second. Hyejin raised her hand slightly, and everyone relaxed just enough to remember they were supposed to be diplomats, not soldiers. "Perhaps we should move to the conference room where we can discuss these matters more comfortably. I am sure you would like to rest after your journey." "Vorthak do not require rest in the same manner as humans," Kelthera replied. "We can begin immediately." The conference room had been specially prepared for beings of different sizes and atmospheric requirements. The table was large enough for both delegations, and the environmental controls could adjust to whatever the Vorthak needed to be comfortable. Hyejin had insisted on these details because she wanted nothing to interfere with the actual negotiations. As they took their seats, Hyejin studied the Vorthak delegation carefully. Besides Kelthara, there were 4 other aliens who had been introduced as military advisors and tactical specialists. They all wore the same type of translator device, and they all moved with the same mechanical precision. So Young had been right about their behavior patterns. Kelthera activated a holographic display that showed star maps of human space. Red marks indicated Vorthak forces, and blue marks showed human positions. The red greatly outnumbered the blue, and the strategic situation looked hopeless for humanity. "These are the terms the Vorthak Empire offers to your species," Kelthera announced. "You will withdraw all human forces from these 12 star systems immediately. You will dismantle all military shipyards and weapons manufacturing facilities. You will provide complete technical specifications for your faster-than-light drive technology. In exchange, your species will be permitted to exist in a designated area under Vorthak protection." Hyejin looked at the star map and saw that the 12 systems included some of humanity's most important colonies. The shipyard requirement would leave humans defenseless against any future attack. The demand for FTL technology would give the Vorthak the ability to hunt down any humans who tried to escape their designated area. "These terms require careful consideration," Hyejin said carefully. "My government will need time to review all the implications before we can provide a response." "Your government has already had 3 years to consider the consequences of continued resistance," Kelthera replied. "The time for consideration has ended. You will accept these terms or face the complete annihilation of your species." Dongwu leaned forward slightly and spoke for the first time since entering the room. "And if we accept these terms, what guarantee do we have that the Vorthak Empire will honor its commitments to allow humanity to survive?" The translator was quiet for a moment while Kelthara made sounds like metal scraping against stone. Then it spoke with what almost sounded like amusement. "The guarantee is that the Vorthak Empire does not waste resources destroying species that pose no threat. Your survival depends entirely on your continued compliance with our requirements." So Young asked about the specific boundaries of the area where humans would be allowed to live and whether families would be permitted to stay together during the relocation process. Taeho took notes on everything that was said while trying to read the body language of the Vorthak delegates. Chakra session continued for 3 hours with the aliens explaining their terms in greater detail and the humans asking questions about implementation. Jin woke before dawn and found So Young already working in the small laboratory they had been given on Concordia Station. The xenobiologist was studying recordings of the Vorthak delegation from yesterday's meeting and making notes about their behavior patterns and physical responses to different topics of conversation. Did you notice anything unusual about how they reacted when we asked specific questions? Jin asked, while pouring herself coffee from the machine Taeho had somehow managed to get installed in their temporary quarters. So Young looked up from her data screens with tired eyes that showed she had been working most of the night. Several things, actually. Their body language changed when we asked about guarantees for human survival. The way they held their limbs suggested they were not being completely honest about their intentions. What do you mean by not completely honest? I mean they have no intention of allowing humanity to survive even if we accept all their terms. The biological markers I observed indicate they view humans as a threat that must be eliminated regardless of any surrender agreement. Jin felt her stomach drop, but she was not surprised by this information. She had suspected the Vorthak. We're not negotiating in good faith, but having scientific confirmation made the situation more real and more dangerous. How certain are you about this assessment? 90% certain based on the physiological responses I recorded. Vorthak cannot lie the same way humans can because their emotional states show up in physical changes they cannot control. When Kelthara talked about human survival, her body language indicated she was thinking about something that contradicted her words. Dongwu entered the laboratory carrying his morning briefing reports and looking grim. We have a bigger problem than their dishonesty. Our intelligence teams have been monitoring their ship since it arrived, and we detected unusual scanning activity during the night. What kind of scanning? Jin asked, though she already feared she knew the answer. Deep penetration scans of the station's computer systems and databases. They are not just studying our defensive capabilities. They are downloading detailed information about human space, including the locations of every major colony and military installation. So Young set down her data pad and looked at both of them with growing alarm. If they have access to our strategic databases, they will know exactly where to strike to cause maximum damage to human civilization. They could wipe out our ability to resist in a matter of weeks. Taeho appeared in the doorway looking worried and holding his communication device. I have been monitoring Vorthak transmissions, and I think you need to hear this. They are using encrypted channels, but our code breakers have made some progress. He activated a small speaker that played sounds like metal grinding against metal, followed by the mechanical voice of a translation program. The words were fragmented, but the meaning was clear enough to understand. Phase 1. Intelligence gathering. Proceeding as planned. Human defensive positions confirmed. Colony locations verified. Recommend acceleration of final phase. Target species shows no awareness of true purpose. Elimination protocols can begin ahead of schedule. The four humans stood in silence for several moments while the implications of what they had heard sank in completely. The peace talks were not just a deception. They were an active intelligence-gathering operation designed to help the Vorthak plan the complete destruction of humanity. How long do we have before they finish collecting the information they need? Jin asked. Dongwu checked his tactical reports before answering. Based on the rate of data transfer, we observed our systems will be completely mapped within 48 hours. After that, they will have everything they need to coordinate simultaneous attacks on every human world. Jin began pacing around the small laboratory while her mind raced through possible responses to this situation. Every option seemed to lead to disaster for humanity, but doing nothing would certainly result in extinction. Can we cut off their access to our computer systems without making it obvious what we have discovered? Not without raising suspicions, Taeho replied. They will know immediately if we block their scanning efforts, and that might cause them to attack before we can prepare any defenses. So Young had been studying the intercepted communications more carefully, and she looked up with a new expression of concern. There is something else we need to consider. The transmission mentioned acceleration of the final phase, which suggests they have a specific timeline for eliminating humanity. This is not a spontaneous decision based on failed negotiations. You mean they plan to destroy us regardless of what happened in these talks? I mean, this entire war might have been planned from the beginning as a way to study human capabilities before launching a final genocidal campaign. Every battle we fought gave them more information about our tactics and technology and psychology. Dongwu nodded grimly as this explanation fit with his own observations about Vorthak military behavior during the war. They never tried to win quickly even when they had opportunities to do so. They seemed more interested in testing our responses than achieving decisive victories. The implications of this realization were staggering. Humanity had been fighting for survival, while the Vorthak had been conducting a 3-year research project to determine the most efficient way to commit genocide. Every human victory had actually helped the enemy by providing more data about human capabilities and limitations. Jin stopped pacing and looked at her team with growing determination. If they want to study us, then we need to make sure they learn something unexpected. But first we need to confirm exactly what they are planning and when they intend to do it. How do we do that without exposing ourselves? Taeho asked. We continue playing our role as naive diplomats while secretly gathering intelligence about their real intentions. So Young, I need you to observe every interaction with their delegation and document any behavior that reveals their true plans. Dongwu, I need you to coordinate with our fleet commanders and prepare contingency plans for every possible scenario. What about the peace talks themselves? Dongwu asked. Do we continue pretending to negotiate? We continue the talks exactly as planned, but we use them as an opportunity to learn about the enemy instead of trying to reach an actual agreement. If they want to gather intelligence about humanity, then we will gather intelligence about them. So Young began organizing her equipment for more detailed observation of Vorthak behavior patterns. I can set up monitoring devices that will record their biological responses to different topics and questions. If they are planning something specific, their bodies will show stress markers when we get close to sensitive subjects. Taeho was already working on securing their communications with human command to make sure they could coordinate any response without the Vorthak detecting their activities. I can also establish back-channel communications with our intelligence services to share what we learn in real time. The second day of talks began with Kelthara appearing even more confident than she had been during the first session. Her translator device seemed to carry a tone of satisfaction when she asked whether humanity had reached a decision about accepting Vorthak terms. We are still reviewing the complex implications of your proposals, Jin replied diplomatically. However, we do have some additional questions about the implementation process that might help us reach a final decision. Ask your questions quickly. The Vorthak Empire does not have unlimited patience for species that cannot accept reality. Jin had prepared her questions carefully to test So Young's theory about Vorthak intentions while appearing to seek clarification about the surrender terms. When human populations are relocated to the designated survival area, how will the Vorthak Empire ensure their long-term security and prosperity? The biological monitoring equipment So Young had discreetly positioned around the conference room immediately detected changes in Vorthak physiology. Heart rate increases and stress hormone releases indicated that Kelthara's answer would not match her true thoughts. The Vorthak Empire has extensive experience managing inferior species. Your survival will be ensured through proper oversight and control of your activities. Dongwu asked the next planned question. What resources will be provided to help relocated human populations establish sustainable communities in their new environment? Again, the monitoring equipment showed stress responses from multiple Vorthak delegates before Kelthara answered. Resources will be allocated based on demonstrated compliance with Vorthak requirements and the ongoing value of human labor for imperial projects. The pattern continued throughout the morning session, with every question about long-term human welfare-producing biological stress responses that indicated deception. By lunch break, So Young had documented clear evidence that the Vorthak delegation was lying about every aspect of human survival under their proposed agreement. During the lunch recess, the human team met privately to review what they had learned. So Young's data confirmed their worst fears about Vorthak intentions, while also revealing new information about the timeline for their plans. The stress responses were strongest when we asked about specific dates and locations for human relocation, So Young reported. Jin could not sleep again, and found herself in the observation deck at 3 in the morning, staring at the stars and thinking about everything her team had discovered about the Vorthak Empire. The aliens were not just conquerors or slavers, but something far worse than anything humanity had imagined possible. So Young joined her an hour later, carrying 2 cups of coffee and a data pad filled with her latest research. I have been analyzing every piece of information we have about Vorthak behavior, and I think I understand something important about how their minds work. What have you found? They are not capable of strategic retreat or tactical withdrawal. Every battle report from the war shows the same pattern. Vorthak forces either achieve complete victory or fight until they are completely destroyed. There is no middle ground in their military thinking. Hyejin took the coffee gratefully and considered this information. You mean they cannot adapt their strategies when a situation turns against them? More than that. I think they are psychologically incapable of considering the possibility that they might lose. Their entire species has evolved around the concept of absolute dominance, and they cannot process scenarios where they are not in complete control. This was potentially the most important discovery her team had made since arriving at Concordia Station. If the Vorthak could not conceive of losing, then they would not prepare for scenarios where their plans failed. They would be vulnerable to any strategy that turned their assumptions against them. There is something else, So Young continued, while showing Hyejin data from her biological monitoring. I have been studying their stress responses when we asked questions about other species they conquered. They showed no emotional reaction to discussing genocide, but they became agitated when we asked about resistance they faced. What kind of agitation? The kind that suggests they have encountered more resistance than they admit. I think some of those 43 species fought back harder than the Vorthak expected, and it made them nervous about facing unexpected opposition. Dongwu arrived at the observation deck carrying his tactical briefing and looking like he had not slept either. I have been reviewing all our intelligence about Vorthak military capabilities, and I found something interesting. They have never fought a war that lasted more than 2 years. What does that mean for us? Hyejin asked. It means they are not prepared for extended conflicts with enemies who can match their production capacity. Every species they conquered was overwhelmed quickly by superior numbers and technology. But humanity has been fighting them for 3 years, and we are still producing ships and weapons at the same rate we were when the war started. So Young looked up from her datapad with growing excitement. That fits with my analysis of their psychology. They cannot understand how an inferior species could continue resisting after demonstrating their superiority. It goes against everything their minds can accept as possible. Taeho found them an hour later and reported that he had intercepted more Vorthak communications during the night. The messages were increasingly focused on accelerating their timeline and expressing concern about unexpected variables in their calculations. They are worried about something they did not plan for, he said, while playing back translated excerpts from the intercepted transmissions. One message specifically mentioned that human behavior patterns do not match their predictions based on studying other species. Hyejin felt pieces of a larger picture starting to come together in her mind. The Vorthak had spent 3 years studying humanity, but they had been studying the wrong things. They understood human technology and tactics, but they did not understand human psychology or the human capacity for adaptation under pressure. We need to make them even more nervous, she said suddenly. If they are already worried about unexpected variables, then we should give them more variables to worry about. How do we do that without revealing what we know about their real plans? Dongwu asked. We use today's talks to demonstrate capabilities they do not expect us to have. We show them that humanity is not like the other species they conquered and that their assumptions about us are wrong. So Young began organizing her equipment for more detailed monitoring of Vorthak responses. I can track their stress levels. As we introduce new information and see which revelations cause the most concern. What kind of information are you thinking about? Taeho asked. Hyejin had been developing this idea throughout the night as she considered everything they had learned about Vorthak psychology and strategic thinking. Information that demonstrates we have been studying them as carefully as they have been studying us. Information that shows we understand their history and their methods better than they realize. The third day of talks began with Kelthara appearing more impatient than before. Her translator device carried an edge of irritation when she demanded to know whether humanity had reached a final decision about accepting Vorthak terms. We are prepared to give you our answer, Hyejin replied calmly. But first we would like to discuss some concerns we have about the long-term relationship between our species and the Vorthak Empire. There will be no long-term relationship. There will only be Vorthak authority and human compliance. That is exactly what concerns us. We have been studying the history of the Vorthak Empire, and we notice some troubling patterns in how you have dealt with other species. The monitoring equipment immediately detected elevated stress responses from the entire Vorthak delegation. Kelthera's translator was silent for several seconds before responding. What patterns do you believe you have observed? Hyjin activated a holographic display that showed a star map of Vorthak space with detailed information about the 43 species they had conquered. We noticed that every species that surrendered to Vorthak authority subsequently disappeared from the historical record within 5 years of their surrender. The stress readings from the Vorthak delegation spiked dramatically as they realized that humanity had been conducting its own intelligence-gathering operations. Kelthera's biological responses showed confusion and agitation at levels so young had never recorded before. The integration of conquered species into the imperial structure is a complex process that requires time and careful management. Kelthera replied, but her stress indicators showed she was lying. Dongwu presented the next piece of information they had prepared. We also noticed that the Vorthak Empire has never fought a war lasting longer than 24 months until now. Our conflict has continued for 36 months, which suggests something about humanity does not fit your normal patterns. Some species require more time to accept reality than others, Kelthera said, but her agitation was becoming visible even without monitoring equipment. So Young asked the question designed to cause maximum psychological impact. We are curious about the Keth Mori species that resisted Vorthak expansion in the Andromeda sector 15 years ago. Our records show they had similar technology levels to humanity, but their resistance collapsed after 18 months. What made them different from us? The stress readings reached levels that indicated the Vorthak delegation was approaching panic. Kelthera made sounds like breaking metal before her translator spoke. How did you obtain information about Keth Mori resistance? That data was classified at the highest imperial levels. Hyjin smiled for the first time since the talks began. The same way we obtained information about your current fleet deployments in 7 sectors and your timeline for final phase operations. Humanity has been studying the Vorthak Empire much longer than you realize. The conference room fell completely silent as the implications of this statement sank in. The Vorthak had been so focused on gathering intelligence about humanity that they had never considered the possibility that humans might be gathering intelligence about them. Taeho activated another holographic display that showed detailed information about Vorthak military installations, fleet movements, and strategic capabilities. We know about your bases in the Centauri cluster and your supply lines through the Vega corridor and your shipyards in the Arcturus system. We know about your standard genocide protocols and your population elimination techniques and your resource extraction methods, So Young added while watching Vorthak's stress levels continue to climb. Dongwu presented tactical analyses that demonstrated human understanding of Vorthak military doctrine and strategic thinking. We know that you have never faced an enemy that could match your production capacity or maintain resistance for more than 2 years or adapt their strategies based on studying your methods. Kelthera attempted to regain control of the situation by standing and making threatening gestures with her mechanical limbs. Your intelligence gathering changes nothing about the reality of your situation. The Vorthak Empire will destroy humanity regardless of what information you possess. That brings us to our primary concern, Hyjin said while remaining seated and calm. The Vorthak Empire has destroyed 43 species, but those species did not know what they were facing until it was too late. Humanity knows exactly what you are and what you intend to do, and we have had 3 years to prepare for it. Prepare for what? For the war you actually want to fight instead of the surrender you pretend to offer. The 4th day began differently than the previous 3 days. Kelthera arrived at the conference room with additional Vorthak personnel who were clearly not diplomats or advisors. Their equipment looked more like weapons than translation devices, and their movements suggested they were prepared for violence rather than negotiation. Hyjin noticed these changes immediately but showed no reaction as she took her seat at the conference table. So Young had positioned her monitoring equipment to record whatever happened during this session, while Dongwu and Taeho prepared themselves for the possibility that talks might end abruptly. The Vorthak Empire has reviewed the information. Presented yesterday, Kelthera announced through her translator. Your species possesses intelligence capabilities that were not anticipated in our strategic assessments. We are pleased that you recognize humanity's abilities, Hyejin replied calmly. Does this change your perspective on the terms you offered for ending this conflict? It changes our assessment of the threat your species represents to imperial security. Intelligence gathering of the type you demonstrated cannot be tolerated from any species that claims to seek peaceful coexistence with the Empire. The biological monitors showed that Kelthera was much calmer than she had been the previous day, but her stress patterns indicated she was following a predetermined script rather than engaging in actual negotiation. The Vorthak delegation had spent the night developing a new approach to the situation. Dongwu asked the question they had prepared to test Vorthak intentions. Are you suggesting that humanity's knowledge about the Vorthak Empire disqualifies us from the survival terms you originally offered? I am stating that species with advanced intelligence capabilities must be managed differently than species that pose only conventional military threats. So Young leaned forward slightly as her monitoring equipment detected deception markers in Kelthera's response. What kind of different management would be required for species like humanity? The pause before Kelthera answered was longer than usual, and her biological responses showed she was choosing her words very carefully. Enhanced oversight and control measures would be necessary to ensure that intelligence-gathering activities do not threaten imperial stability. Hyejin understood that they were hearing the Vorthak version of a revised surrender offer that would involve even more restrictions on human freedom and probably faster implementation of genocidal policies. Could you provide more specific details about these enhanced measures? Human populations would be relocated to smaller designated areas with limited communication capabilities. Advanced technology would be completely prohibited. All human activities would be directly supervised by Imperial personnel. Taeho took notes while calculating that the revised terms would make human survival impossible within a matter of months. The restrictions being described would prevent humans from maintaining any kind of technological civilization or even basic infrastructure. These terms seem designed to ensure human extinction rather than human survival, Dongwu observed. These terms are designed to ensure imperial security, Kelthera replied. Human survival is secondary to that objective. For the first time since the talks began, one of the Vorthak had stated their true priorities openly. Human survival was not actually part of their calculations, and never had been. The admission confirmed everything Hyejin's team had suspected about alien intentions. In that case, we need to discuss something more important than surrender terms, Hyejin said, while activating her own holographic display. We need to discuss what humanity has learned about Vorthak vulnerabilities during our 3 years of intelligence gathering. The new display showed detailed analyses of Vorthak military operations, including tactical patterns, supply chain dependencies, and strategic weaknesses that human forces had identified and exploited during the war. It also showed information that the Vorthak clearly did not expect humans to possess. Your empire has never fought an enemy that could analyze your methods and adapt their strategies accordingly, Hyejin continued. Every previous conquest succeeded because your opponents did not understand what they were facing until it was too late to develop effective countermeasures. Kelthera's stress readings spiked as she realized that humanity had not just been gathering intelligence about Vorthak capabilities, but had been analyzing Vorthak weaknesses and developing strategies to exploit them. So Young presented data about Vorthak psychological limitations and how human commanders had learned to use those limitations against them in battle. Your species cannot adapt tactics during combat operations because your minds do not process the possibility of failure. This makes you predictable to enemies who understand your psychological constraints. Your logistics systems are vulnerable to disruption because you plan for overwhelming victory rather than extended conflict, Dongwu added, while showing analyses of successful human attacks on Vorthak supply lines. When your initial plans fail, you do not have backup systems to maintain operations. Taeho revealed intelligence about Vorthak, internal politics, and administrative structures that showed the empire was not as unified or stable as it appeared from the outside. Your conquered territories require constant military presence to prevent rebellion, which limits the forces available for new expansion. The cumulative effect of these revelations was devastating to Vorthak confidence. They had assumed that their intelligence gathering during the peace talks would give them decisive advantages, but instead they were discovering that humanity understood them better than they understood themselves. This information changes nothing about the fundamental balance of power, Kelthera said, but her biological responses indicated she was trying to convince herself as much as the human delegation. The Vorthak Empire still controls superior resources and technology. Superior resources and technology did not prevent humanity from surviving 3 years of war that you expected to end in less than 1 year, Hyejin replied. Superior resources and technology will not prevent humanity from making this conflict so costly that your empire cannot recover from the damage. You speak as if your species has some strategy that could threaten imperial survival. Hyejin stood up slowly and looked directly at Kelthera with an expression that made the alien delegation shift uncomfortably in their seats. Humanity does have such a strategy, and we have been implementing it since the day this war began. She activated a new holographic display that showed the current positions of human and Vorthak forces throughout the galaxy. But this display included information that the aliens clearly had not expected humans to possess, including the locations of secret Vorthak installations and the movements of covert Vorthak fleets. While you have been studying humanity, we have been studying the Vorthak Empire, and we have learned something very important about your species. You are excellent at destroying civilizations, but you are terrible at defending your own civilization when it comes under attack. The monitoring equipment showed panic responses from multiple Vorthak delegates as they realized the implications of what Hyejin was saying. Human intelligence capabilities were far more advanced than they had suspected, and human strategic planning had been proceeding on a completely different timeline than they had assumed. Dongwu presented tactical analyses showing how human forces had been positioning themselves to strike at critical Vorthak infrastructure, while the aliens focused their attention on human territory. Your empire spans thousands of star systems, but your control depends on a relatively small number of key installations and supply routes. We know where those installations are, and we know how to destroy them, So Young added. More importantly, we know that your psychology prevents you from believing that any enemy could threaten your core territories while you are attacking their frontiers. Taeho revealed the most devastating information of all. Human fleets have been moving into position around critical Vorthak systems for the past 6 months while you were planning your intelligence-gathering operation. Your own security forces did not detect the infiltration because they were not looking for threats to Imperial territory. Kelthera made sounds like metal tearing as the full scope of human strategic deception became clear. You have been using these peace talks as a cover for positioning attack forces. We have been using these peace talks exactly the way you intended to use them, Hyejin replied. The difference is that we succeeded while you failed. The holographic display updated to show real-time positions of human attack fleets that were now surrounding major Vorthak installations throughout their empire. The aliens had been so focused on gathering intelligence about human defenses that they had never considered the possibility that humans might be planning offensive operations. While you were downloading information about human colonies, we were uploading viruses into your computer networks, Taeho said. While you were studying our military capabilities, we were studying your industrial infrastructure. While you were planning our destruction, we were planning yours. So Young presented biological data showing that the Vorthak delegation was approaching complete psychological breakdown. Your species has never faced coordinated attacks on your home territory because you always maintain the initiative in conflicts. The alarms throughout Concordia Station were not warning signals about Vorthak treachery, but confirmation signals that human operations had begun exactly as planned. Hyejin remained standing while the Vorthak delegation struggled to comprehend how completely their strategic situation had changed in the span of a single conversation. Taeho activated his communication equipment and began receiving real-time reports from human fleet commanders throughout the galaxy. Operation Sunrise has commenced on schedule. All primary targets are engaged. Initial reports indicate successful penetration of Vorthak defenses at 17 critical installations. Kelthara attempted to access her own communications, but discovered that human electronic warfare capabilities had completely isolated the Vorthak delegation from their command structure. You cannot maintain this communications blackout indefinitely. When Imperial forces realize what has happened, they will respond with overwhelming force. Imperial forces will be too busy defending their own territory to mount any coordinated response to human operations, Dongwu replied, while monitoring tactical displays that showed the progress of simultaneous human attacks across Vorthak. Space. Your fleet commanders are discovering that they face threats in every sector simultaneously. So Young was watching her biological monitors with fascination as she observed the complete breakdown of Vorthak's psychological defenses. Your species has never experienced defensive warfare because you have never faced an enemy capable of threatening your core territories. Your military doctrine has no provisions for responding to coordinated attacks on Imperial infrastructure. The scale of human strategic deception was becoming clear as reports continued arriving from across the galaxy. While the Vorthak had focused their attention on gathering intelligence about human defensive capabilities, humanity had been positioning attack forces throughout alien territory using stealth technology and tactics the Empire had never encountered. How? Did you infiltrate our territory without detection? Kelthera demanded while her stress readings approached levels that could be dangerous to her health. The same way your species infiltrated human territory for 3 years, Hyajin replied. We studied your patrol patterns and your detection methods and your strategic assumptions until we understood exactly how to avoid your security systems. Tejo provided more details about human infiltration techniques. Vorthak security forces search for threats that match patterns from previous conflicts with other species, but humanity uses different technologies and different tactics than any species you have conquered before. Your empire spans thousands of star systems, but you only actively patrol a small percentage of Imperial space, Dongwu added. The rest of your territory is defended by automated systems that can be defeated by enemies who understand how those systems operate. So Young presented data showing how human intelligence services had spent months mapping Vorthak defensive networks and identifying vulnerabilities that could be exploited by coordinated attacks. Your automated defenses are designed to stop conventional invasion fleets, but they cannot stop small stealth forces that target specific critical systems. Reports from Operation Sunrise continued to arrive with devastating effectiveness. Human forces had successfully attacked Vorthak shipyards in the Centauri cluster and disrupted supply lines through the Vega corridor and damaged industrial facilities in the Arcturus system. Every target had been chosen for maximum strategic impact on Imperial capabilities. These attacks will slow Imperial expansion, but they cannot stop the Vorthak Empire from continuing to exist, Kelthera said, while trying to maintain some semblance of confidence despite her obvious psychological distress. You are correct that these attacks alone cannot destroy your empire, Hyajin agreed. But they accomplish something more important than immediate destruction. They prove that the Vorthak Empire is not invincible. The implications of this demonstration were more significant than the immediate military damage. For centuries, the Vorthak Empire had expanded unopposed because every species they encountered believed that resistance was futile. Now humanity had proven that Vorthak forces could be defeated and Vorthak territory could be successfully attacked. Dongwu activated a communication channel that allowed the Vorthak delegation to hear reports from their own military commanders who were struggling to respond to unexpected attacks throughout Imperial space. The confusion and panic in alien voices was clear even through translation devices. Your fleet commanders do not know how to coordinate defensive operations because your military doctrine assumes that all threats will come from outside Imperial borders, he explained. They are trying to use offensive tactics to defend territory that is already under attack. So Young presented psychological analyses that predicted how Vorthak military leadership would respond to the crisis. Your commanders will attempt to maintain offensive operations against human territory while simultaneously defending Imperial installations. This will spread your forces too thin to be effective at either objective. More importantly, your species cannot accept the possibility that you might need to retreat from human territory to defend your own territory, Tejo added. Your psychology will force you to continue attacking even when defense would be the logical strategic choice. The accuracy of these predictions was confirmed by the Vorthak military communications they were intercepting. Imperial commanders were indeed refusing to withdraw forces from human space, despite the obvious need to defend critical installations throughout their empire. He Jin walked to the observation windows and looked out at the Vorthak flagship that was still docked with Concordia Station. Your ship is surrounded by human forces that have been in position since before your delegation arrived. Your crew knows this, but they cannot retreat because Vorthak psychology does not allow for tactical withdrawal. What do you intend to do with our delegation? Kelthera asked. We intend to return you to Vorthak space so you can report what you have learned to your Imperial leadership, Hyejin replied. But first you will witness the next phase of human operations. Tae-ho activated a holographic display that showed the positions of additional human fleets that had been hidden throughout the galaxy, waiting for the signal to begin their attacks. Operation Sunrise was only the beginning. Operation Daybreak will commence in 6 hours and will target twice as many Imperial installations. How many operations have you planned? Kelthera demanded. Enough operations to keep your empire under constant attack for the next 2 years, Dongwu answered. By the end of that period, your capacity to maintain control over conquered territories will be severely degraded, and your ability to launch new conquests will be eliminated. So Young presented projections showing how sustained attacks on Vorthak infrastructure would affect Imperial stability over time. Your empire depends on continuous expansion to maintain the resources needed to control existing territories. When expansion stops, your control over conquered species will begin to weaken. The long-term strategic implications were more devastating than the immediate military attacks. Humanity had not just planned to damage the Vorthak Empire, but to fundamentally alter the balance of power throughout the galaxy by proving that alien expansion could be stopped and reversed. Even if you succeed in damaging Imperial capabilities, other species will not have the strength to resist Vorthak forces, Kelthera argued. Other species will not need to resist Vorthak forces because there will not be enough Vorthak forces left to threaten them, Hyejin replied. When your empire is forced to defend territory instead of conquering new territory, your military will become progressively weaker relative to potential opponents. Tae-ho showed communications intercepts from several species that had been monitoring human operations and were already beginning to organize resistance movements in Vorthak-controlled territories. The galaxy is watching humanity fight the Vorthak Empire and win. Species that accepted conquest because they believed resistance was impossible are reconsidering their situations. Your greatest strategic advantage has always been the belief that opposing the Vorthak Empire meant certain destruction, Dongwu explained. When that belief disappears, your empire will face rebellions and resistance movements on dozens of worlds simultaneously. So Young presented psychological profiles of conquered species, showing that many retained the capacity for organized resistance if they believed victory was possible. 43 species accepted Vorthak rule because they had no hope of successful rebellion. But hope is contagious, and it spreads quickly once it begins. The reports from Operation Sunrise continued to arrive, with confirmation that human attacks had exceeded their projected success rates. Vorthak defenses had been even more vulnerable to human tactics than strategic planners had anticipated because alien commanders could not adapt their responses to unexpected threats. Your empire will survive these attacks, Hyejin said, while turning back to face the Vorthak delegation. But it will never again be the invincible force that conquered 43 species without serious opposition. From this day forward, the Vorthak Empire will be just another interstellar power struggling to maintain its territory against enemies who are no longer afraid.